finally, a source of raw, real, and honest information on healthcare issues that matter most. Welcome to BS Free MD. From the latest medical information to how to stay sane as a doctor or a patient, no subject is taboo, no BS is allowed. Now, let's welcome your hosts, Doctors May and Tim Hindmarsh.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of BS Free MD, where we cut through the noise to get to real stories behind medicine, life, and everything in between. Today, our topic is actually chronic disease management through ketogenic nutrition, but we might be going down some other bunny trails as Tim starts hopping off.
We never
topic,
do that.
Because knowing our guest and all her stories, that might happen just because there's so many interesting things we can talk about. And our guest, who is amazing, inspiring, and known as a doctor of internal medicine, as well as going by the handle of Dr. Boz, is Dr. Annette Bosworth. She is a best-selling author, a mother, wife, teacher, and a great storyteller. She actually was born into a farming family in rural South Dakota and has carried that hardworking spirit into her medical career. She's known for her practical approach to medicine, using storytelling to make complex medical jargon understandable for her patients and students. We try to do that as well in our practice and
fail
the podcast, because we know nobody likes to not understand what's going on. She's also a former assistant professor from the South Dakota School of Medicine and a practicing internal medicine doctor focusing on chronic diseases like obesity, diabetes, depression, addiction, and even autoimmune disorders. Her debut book, Any Way You Can, tells the compelling story of her 71-year-old mother's battle with cancer and the power of ketogenic nutrition. And Dr. Boz continues her storytelling in her book, Keto Continuum, where she uses David's story to teach us how to live a consistently keto lifestyle. So we're excited to get back into the topic of keto diet and get into her sort of journey, her insights, and of course, hear a story or two. So welcome, Dr. Boz.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me on. I can say hi, neighbor, right?
Yes,
absolutely.
Yeah, we were just talking before we started recording about us being from just north of her, up in Canada, and you being from South Dakota, and you still got your accent a little bit. I think.
Oh yeah, you bet.
I think we've lost ours.
I got it. I got in trouble at work the other day because I think I said Surrey or something like that, and they were like, because normally I have no other accent, and they were like, "What the hell was that?"
Saying sorry.
And
that's a Canadian.
They had no idea I was from Canada. And they were like, I said, "That's Canada." And she's like, "Yeah, I knew it."
Yeah.
Like,
what's the cartoon where the moose were the Canadians accent? They were my spirit animal. Like, and they had the animal that's got.
I'm trying to think what that cartoon was. I'm thinking Fargo,
Rocky
of course.
And Bullwinkle?
Yeah, well, that's right. Yeah, similar.
There's another one where it's the moose are. How old do you have kids?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So what are your ages?
Mid-20s, 25 and 26.
So mine are 24, 21, and 18. So similar. So I'm the cartoon era right after you graduated. I still was in it. And there's a great one that's got these two moose that speak back and forth, and they speak. Yeah.
I think I remember that because my sister, who was 7 years younger, was into those. And I think I kind of remember what you're talking about. I can't remember the name of it.
You're the Canadian prairie woman, and I'll be the American prairie woman, because it's really Midwest, and that accent just slides right up north.
I'll probably start picking it up.
Except South Dakota has such unbelievably good roads compared to where I'm from. Like, the roads are in great shape.
Honestly, you have to build them right there. My dad used to actually brag that our roads in South Dakota use 5 bags of cement for every blah, blah, blah of water. And I'm like, no one cares, Dad. And then as I get older, I'm like, I can't believe the rest of the roads in the country are so awful.
Yeah, no, it's when you ride a motorcycle, though, you really appreciate the 5 bags of cement. For for sure.
There you go.
After my training, I moved back to South Dakota, and I took a summer job because the place I was waiting to get into wasn't built, and I ran the emergency room in Chamberlain, South Dakota, and I couldn't figure out why everybody else didn't want to work the first week of August. So I took this 10-day shift. And I'm like, what is wrong with me? How could I forget that the first week of August is Sturgis Rally and bikes galore? Anyway, I was very sleep deprived by the end of the 10 days.
No, it's
speaking right to Tim's heart.
Well, but it's fascinating because, being a physician and being like a weirdo at the same time, I'll go to bike week and I look for the morbidity and mortality data.
Yeah, well,
it's everywhere there.
But the thing that's fascinating, because you can't break it down, the only mortality data they give you is motorcycle crashes. So,
yeah, there's way more than that.
And I'm like, that's nothing, because like on average, there's maybe 5 to 10 people that die in motorcycle crashes a year at the rally. Like during
how about intoxication?
Yeah, but that's the point. How many people die from drug overdoses, from alcoholism, from fights, from
other accidents?
But you don't get any of that data, and that's what I really want to understand. If you really want to understand how dangerous it is, motorcycling is just one little piece of the pie.
So now I want to know though, you got a crazy story from that?
Several
you could think of
stories
before we get into the topic du jour here?
Yeah, well, so the first job I took running an ER was in Fillmore, Utah, and my first motorcycle accident was probably, I'm not even 6 months out of residency, and it's the first week of August, and these motorcycles are heading from LA to South Dakota, and they're in the middle of Utah, and a tire blows out on their motorcycle. The guy is a physician, and his wife is riding the motorcycle with him. They have a horrific accident about a mile from the ER, and it was the first time I was alone, because you're the only doc for 100 miles. I was alone, and this, physician's short-term memory was busted, and his wife was dead. And I think I told him that his wife had died probably 12 times before we could get a helicopter in and to get him to the next place, because he was ours for like 24 hours. There was weather and all kinds of things that couldn't get, which is why the tire blew out. And it was just an awful scene where you're like, yeah, they had the life, they had a perfect life, and then they didn't. It was just that quick. But knuckleheaded things, honestly, were the things people do inside those trailers. And you're like, I don't want to know anymore. from sex toys to the way you jimmy rig your motorcycle up against so it doesn't run into the cooking gear, and why do you have all that in one place, and then when things go wrong, when your trailer busts, and all across the ditch of South Dakota is your stuff you were trying to have hidden in that Sturgis. And then what happens when the emergency rescue people show up to say, why, let me help you pick this up, honey.
But what is this here? I know. Do you find that I got to a point in my career where, we got arrogant enough to say, we've heard everything. And then the needle tipped again. And as we got older and the next generation comes along, I think, where stuff more, I'm like, what is that? People do what? And then I was like, things still surprise me.
Yeah.
And you hear,
I think what was very attractive about Sturgis is how the desire to escape. I mean, that's really what they're going for is, add the sex, drugs, rock and roll, but really that motorcycle ride where you cannot, nobody's texting and driving. There's no screen distracting you, the sound of life and wind and all of the freedom that comes with that experience of riding a motorcycle. And I'm not a motorcycle rider. I take care of brains for a living. So this is, good for business when y'all.
That's funny.
But the escape, the desire for escape. And I just, when you frame it there, I have a lot more grace and forgiveness for folks, but the entertainment is still a little never
That's
ending.
Right. We said it's cosplay for professionals.
No, I've called it. It's cosplay for doctors and lawyers. The thing is this, though, you can get whatever you want to there. I mean, you could go to like a church service every day, or you can be in like
debauchery.
Right. What I love is, I love the vendors because I'm into bikes. I love the riding is absolutely exceptional in the Black Hills, and the concerts are really, really good.
Right? Yeah.
The concerts are really good. And so there's always something you can find that's not too crazy. They really cleaned it up. They corporatized Sturgis several years ago because they had a real gang problem back in the day. That's all gone.
Yeah.
It's bad for business. It's like Vegas. The mob might still be there. You're never going to see them.
Right. Well, honestly, they've had a really improved profile. I mean, I think that was more than 10 years ago that my brain was saying, no, they are really working at making this a great experience for people. And, my husband and I, we took the kids there. I did a raffle of Harley Davidson motorcycle for mental health for veterans. And so we sold tickets one year, and I had the kids come and hand out water and sell tickets. And just the experience of sitting on the street with your little kids watching people do, those are butt cheeks right out of your chaps.
Yes.
Yeah, usually it's not the ones you want to see.
Yeah.
I know. They did not end up on the magazine cover. Sure.
Yeah, that was my experience. The pasties and Sturgis are not the ones you want to see. Much low hanging.
I used to joke that. Yeah, I used to joke that I wanted to just get a summer job there for a couple of weeks, making some extra money. And
if you get a job in the right place, you do just fine. You would have no trouble at all. Seriously. No, seriously.
Kidding. I'm kidding.
I tell you where not to. It's not that hard.
Anyway.
Okay, so let's
segue from that
into keto.
Yeah.
No, but it's interesting. There? It's interesting because you had similar training to us. You're a generalist. You're an internal medicine generalist, and we're family practice generalists. And so, small town, we did that. We did everything but the ER. We did death investigations. I delivered babies. We did ICU, like the whole deal. So we've had very similar backgrounds, and allopathic trained. So how did this journey from, the ER in the hinterlands where you are the pointy end of the spear, traditionally trained physician, to keto? How did that happen? Because that has not happened to very many of us.
Well, and surviving even this long in medicine, I mean, we're similar ages if your kids are about that age. And, the amount of experience in 25 years, and where I could have never planned this is where I'd end up this is where I'd be. But a privileged life, right? I mean, the experience of being a physician and being welcomed into the places of intimacy and, other, people go to jail for asking the questions we ask behind that exam room door. And well, maybe not today, but the discretion of having conversations that you get to have. I started out, the reason I went to medical school was to not be a farmer's wife. So I was more fear-based than I just knew if you had a job in medicine, there was a really high chance you were going to be employed. And that was a good thing. So I had nobody in my family that had gone to college for 4 years, let alone medical school. And when I got to choosing internal medicine, I knew that when I would parrot the stuff, I would hear other physicians answer my questions. When I would deliver that to my parents, that was the most satisfying for them and for me. So I ended up in internal medicine because it was a deep dive, and it seemed to have this reward for the people I loved, having answers for them. And then I thought I was going to be in this analytical side of medicine where you could calculate the answers and it was no gray zone. And this was called an ICU, shock trauma. We had a team of people. You could calculate how you were going to extubate, intubate, do almost everything, had a calculation with it. And that seemed lovely. And the day I was disappointed was they were doing a study in this shock trauma in Salt Lake City, Utah, was where I did my training. And the study had been going on before I got there, but it ended in my second year of residency. And the question was, what is the biggest predictor of mortality for the patient in an ICU? And take a guess what the answer was.
Obesity.
Well, that's a good question. That's good. Most of the people with obesity don't make it into that ICU. Actually, they die before they can ever get in there.
The biggest predictor then, for mortality.
Well, it might just be blood sugar.
I was going to say body mass.
Yeah,
in
well,
the
No, you're
those are all
TMI.
lovely.
Yeah.
I would love those to be the answer. That would be great. I mean, but the answer
How
was,
about family support? I don't know.
oh, so close. It was of the medical team. Did anybody on the medical team serving the patient go through a life crisis?
Wow.
I'm like,
What?
what? Like when the medical team was going through sex, drugs, rock and roll, divorce, kids in rehab, disappointment, depression, when their life was affected, the mortality rate went down or went up. That was the biggest predictor. Like, so I'm like, I was so angry because you can't calculate that. That's very messy.
You can't control that.
But
Right.
that
And
is
you're like,
that blows my mind because we spent a couple hours with John Burke, who is one of the most extensive near-death experience researchers in the world. I think he's done 2,500 interviews, and the whole connection of consciousness and how you can't disconnect human souls from each other
mm,
is a
that's,
real thing. I mean, it
oh yeah.
actually, when you said that, it actually makes sense now.
Mm.
I would have said you're full of crap years ago, but now I'm like, not so much.
Wow. I mean, just like, I mean, the study was looking at these strange things. Like, why are you looking at if my kids are going through rehab? Why are you looking, but when you study the servants, the people in service of those patients and how critical their life balance was, I'm like, oh my goodness, the people who pick shock trauma are by definition a little crazy and they're a little like on the edge, push too hard, don't shut down. I can smell my own kind, I
Mhm.
belonged there. And I had signed up for this crazy fellowship. Now the pulmonary critical care is very competitive. And I have, we had a planned pregnancy. I mean, I didn't plan it quite that quick, but I stopped the birth control pill and son of a gun, we got pregnant. So the baby came December 7th of my third year of residency. And I'm holding a baby as they're, deciding this fellowship. And everything in my heart says, don't do that. And my husband's like, why didn't you be a dermatologist? Don't you know primary care internal medicine is the least way to pay off those loans?
Yep.
Like you're trading one of the most lucrative sections of medicine for the worst, right? I'm like, I know,
Right.
but he needs a mom.
Mhm.
And I don't regret it. I ended up in this lane of internal medicine and out, but I had this analytical kind of mentality. And I was the first one in my clinic to use all EMR, like do not do one thing out of the EMR. So never touched a paper chart, very much an early adapter for pay for performance of physicians. Like don't judge me on how well the patients get better. Use the analytics to see did their blood pressure go down, did their weight go down, really care. I was very competitive in that and did really well. And then I moved back home. I moved back to South Dakota with that mentality that you're going to like me because I am very competitive and aggressive and assertive and really want to get things done. And that did not fit well in the culture of the
No.
medical world I landed in there. It was not welcome. I was known as very disruptive. And it took only a few years in that corporate medicine for me to say, I think I don't belong in this company. Let's start my own practice.
Disruptive is a kind word compared to what I was thinking that they were going to be saying. Because, if you're an assertive female, it can often get spun around into a nasty word instead of.
Well, you figured that out a lot sooner than I did, because I managed to climb the corporate ladder to a certain degree, was on every parent board of a 7-hospital system, all that. And then I just started being, but I was always honest. And then you realize one day they don't want you to be honest. They just want you to say yes. And
I'll push back and say it's easier to fire a woman than I think a man in medicine. And maybe that's being a little sexist, but I looked around me of other people doing exactly what I was doing. And I was the first to fall by about 5 years. And I thought, I just, they took that as a personality rift and then I was blackballed from any interview in the community. And I said, I think I'll just start my own thing. So there was a lot of it that wasn't all my choice, but
I agree with you. I agree.
No, I think that's 100%
I think it's
correct.
that's the way men play in like in the field, but the women aren't allowed to play that game
So
in the business world or the medical world or the corporate world. But even now, I mean, things have changed, and there's some women can do it better, but
they've
I think you're
changed.
right.
But we interviewed about 6-7 months ago. We interviewed a physician contract review company.
Oh,
And
that'd be fun.
oh, it was really fascinating. And so they always ask for a hard copy of the contract, and then they review it. So they know what any contract that they've reviewed, they know in hard dollars what people are getting, what the benefits are, et cetera. Well, inadvertently, this one company gave them their copy and not the physician's copy, and written on the administrator's copy in big letters at the top was female.
Yeah. I can remember. So when I had disrupted things for the final time, it was an awful story. It's injustice, and I could tell it to you, but just imagine trying to do the right thing and getting sabotaged. I'm sure you've heard the story 1,000 times.
We could
And
commiserate together. Yes.
yeah.
Anyway, go ahead.
So I'm at the point where I've just moved my family, and I'm a South Dakotan. I've moved it back to South Dakota. My husband's family's in that community. My family is about 100 miles. My parents are about 100 miles from there. And I've just moved my 3 kids. Okay. So I am not moving again. And I have a non-compete. And the non-compete says you cannot see patients within 20 miles of the advertising of this corporation. I'm like, you advertise from Texas to the North Pole. I mean, you're everywhere. There's no 20 miles without advertising. And of course, they're like, yep, that's why you're going to have to move. And I'm like, I am not moving. And so I get called to the ivory tower, and in the ivory tower, there's a bunch of shiny shoes and white shirts and gray hair, and I'm the only female. And I say, there's got to be a solution. There has to be a way that I can stay in your community for 2 years and see patients. I mean, there has to be a way. They all leave the room and stay away for what feels like an eternity, but at least 15 minutes. And they come back in and say, okay, you can see the homeless and you can see Medicaid. And I thought, first of all, you have no idea who I am. That is perfectly fine. I will find a way to be successful serving the same people I was serving before. And the ones that you were bitching about, because if a VIP had to wait too long and I was serving somebody that didn't have that high of a collection, you kept score.
Mm-hmm.
Don't do that.
Right.
So how did I get to be keto though? So I leave the corporate world and I do this. I do 2 things that I think by the grace of God, and maybe it's through my husband. So the grace of God and my husband that this happened. I'm down during that time when I've been excommunicated from a place where I wanted to be, and I thought I could make it work. I've always been able to work hard enough to make things work, and that it didn't happen. And so I'm in the shelters, which is like Volunteers of America or Lutheran Social Services, where teenagers need physicals for Medicaid. And the shelters, I call them shelters because it's the best term, but they're all brown in this state that's but white. They're Native Americans whose parents are in a season and can't take care of them. And they're trying to be, so they're there for 45 to 90 days. They're products of the state. And I have a little clinic that I have inside one of those facilities, and I'm doing mostly Medicaid, and I have some outreach that I was trying to do. And my husband, the earthquake happens in Haiti, and a clipboard goes around our church and says, who wants to volunteer? And my husband does not know what to do with his cheerleader little doctor wife who's moping around, and so he signs us up. And he doesn't tell me, he just signs us up. And the next day at the clinic, this lady I imagine her with blue curlers and this thick Southern accent says, I'm looking at this volunteer list, and it says here that you're a doctor. What kind of doctor are you? And I'm like, a good one? Why? And she's like, because we need you in Haiti. And I'm like, I don't even know where Haiti is. And she says, well, you signed up. I said, it must have been my husband. And she goes, well, you pray about it. I'm going to call you tomorrow. And she hangs up.
Oh my gosh.
I'm like, that woman is a great saleswoman. I practiced exactly what I was going to tell her. I knew exactly the words I was going to say. And this is my list. And she calls me back the next day. And like something had my throat. I couldn't, I, I, all that came out was yes. So I ended up in Haiti. And it was one of those moments where we got off the plane, and I grew up on a farm that the runway was where you walk down the metal steps from the plane because the airport was a mess. And instantly I can smell death.
Uh-huh.
And the closer we got to the buildings, the more you could smell it. And it was like the disappointment and the disconnect that I had from no longer being welcome in medicine, being the one who was no longer allowed. It's like it personified what I was feeling. And it's like God tore my heart out and said, I've put you in a place where you can do something. And about 2 days later, I could feel the joy of why I was in medicine again. And it saved me. It was like the hardest, most awful, most difficult work I've ever done. That I went back like 34 times to Haiti. I took medical students to Haiti. It became this mission place where I said, it's the freedom to do medicine again. As I got through those 2 years of non-compete, and I found a journey that was very rewarding. And then I grew a clinic that was internal medicine, but peak brain performance. What happens when a brain is broken? And using a lot of that, shock trauma kind of framework and drive to want to understand how to heal a brain. And as I was journeying through and doing well, 2012 hits, and 2014 hits, and I hear an interview between Dom D'Agostino and Tim Ferriss. And they're talking about a protocol that they were using to heal brains for divers in the Navy. So Navy SEALs who were using non-rebreathers, and they were having seizures underwater because of the non-rebreather, and the non-rebreather doesn't let the little bubbles flow. So there's some, and it was that conversation mixed with the brain injuries from NASA, so astronauts. And I was super arrogant about as I'm listening to the conversation, I do that. This is what I do. I'm on point with what these advanced clinicians were doing, until he got to the word, we do it on a bed of ketones. We do it for a ketogenic diet. And I'm like, what? And I'm listening. I go back and listen again, and I'm like, what is he talking about? And it wrecked me. Like, wait a minute. I really work at this to be great at what I do. How do I not know that? And in the end, I end up like slowing down, going to the medical school library, asking the librarian to help me learn everything I can about a ketogenic state, and exclude for ketoacidosis, because that was the only thing I knew about. And then I found this rich environment of, if you want to heal a brain, because what they were doing with their protocol, I was doing the same protocol minus a ketogenic diet, and they were getting outcomes in 6 months where it would take me 18 months to get those same outcomes. Now that's a lot. That's a huge improvement for a patient's life. Right. And I'm like, well, I want the best for my patient, so I want to understand this. And I cancel clinic. And if you run your own clinic, you know that payroll does not like you to cancel clinic. And I canceled it, sat in that med school library for 3 days for like 16 hours each day, just really saying, here's what I would do. Here's how you do this. And I'm kind of afraid to talk about it yet, because I don't really, I have a, kind of a academic, but not a professorial, just like a student academic understanding of what this is. And so I say, okay, I'm going to go on to a ketogenic state. And I get these little strips, and I'm peeing on them. There's no ketones. I'm like, this is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Why can't I pee a ketone? What's wrong that this is so hard? And by now I've had 3 babies, and I've got a full practice, and I've probably got 45 pounds I shouldn't have on, and blah, blah, all the stuff that every clinician probably touches on at some point before they get their game on and undo all that. And so then there's this ruck pack for Memorial Day. where you walk around our city 22 miles with a ruck pack on in honor of those who have fallen for mental illness. So this is a big part of my practice. And I'm like, kids, we're going on a ruck pack. We're going to do this. And I secretly said, if I don't frickin' pee a ketone by the end of these 22 miles, I'm calling this BS. This is not a real thing. This is fake news. And I peed a ketone at the end of that Memorial Day. And said, okay, I'm not eating a single carbohydrate ever again. How do I stay here? And as luck would have it, during that time, not only was I looking for the brain repair protocol for why it was so important for a brain to be in a ketogenic state if it had had seizures, if it had had depression, if it had had Parkinson's, if it had, the list is incredible. Migraines. Wow, that the quickness to repair that was a gift to my patients who are in the season of a valley that is a canyon now because they've been there so long. But there was also a few papers on what it was doing in the cancer research, and they were pretty new. And there was like MD Anderson out of Texas was, the ones who were saying the stuff, and they had a protocol. And I thought, isn't that interesting? And the next month, my mother comes to town 100 miles from home. She lives on a farm, and she walks through the door, and she's had CLL, chronic lymphocytic leukemia, for 10 years. One of the reasons I moved back to South Dakota was I will manage your healthcare. You'll have the best Western medicine has to offer. And she did. And I went to every appointment and managed every little step. And she was terrible. She was terrible. She was a zombie. She walked through the door of my clinic because we'd go to her oncologist together. And you don't need a lab to tell you she's in trouble. You can see her lymph nodes in her neck from across the room. She looks gray. Her eyes tell you that she's not a human. She's a zombie. And she's a Mary Poppins. She made magic happen in that little town of 800 people because of her spirit and her drive and her energy. And it was not her. And as we get to the doctor and he checks her numbers, and she's got 6 months to live, it's doubling. Her cancer is doubling so fast. She needs chemotherapy again. And the last time I talked her into chemotherapy, my mom made all of my clothing. I remember the 6th grade when I got my first pair of blue jeans that had rivets in them, because she didn't have a rivet maker. So these were bought-in jeans. And she didn't know what a sewing machine was for 6 months after the last round of chemo. Like, didn't know what the machine was, let alone use it again.
Wow.
And that doctor says chemotherapy, and she goes, not doing it. Not doing it, guys. I'd rather die than do that again. And so we walk out of that oncology, and we're standing in the lobby. I mean, I wink at the oncologist, and he's my former teacher, but he's my friend. And I said, I got this. We'll schedule it. And we're in the lobby, and she asked that question that I know you've had as physicians. And I try not to lie when patients ask me this question. And she said, well, if it was you, what would you do? Mm-hmm. And I don't want to tell her some protocol or some list. I wonder, you put my brain on the line? Wouldn't you rather die than say I'm going to be a zombie again? Mm-hmm. Might not come back from this one. And I said, Mom, do you trust me? And of course, she gets emotional, and I can think of the emotion at this moment. And she said, with my whole life, honey, tell me what to do. And I said, we could take this pink slip down that hallway and schedule your chemotherapy to happen in your little rural town. The oncologist team won't know till you come back for 6 weeks follow-up. But I think we should go out that front door, get in the same car, drive back to that farm, and I think you should start on a ketogenic diet. And she just said,
one second. Is this the first person that you've treated keto for cancer?
For at all.
For anything. Whoa. Okay.
So your mother is your first keto patient.
Yep.
Oh, this is awesome.
That's balls, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, it's like.
And I have no evidence that her cancer responds to ketones. I have this theory that cancer cells are fueled by a high glucose state, and finding either the fructose or glucose that's in that fuel, blah, 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 blah.
And
My
what
mom
year
was
is
here,
what year is this?
2015.
Oh, really? Okay.
It might be 2016, 2015. Yeah. And I say, okay, Mom. And her brain doesn't work, right? So I have to break this down into what's a ketone?
Mhm.
And then we get to the house and she's like a prairie woman. So she's got like rows and cupboards of preserves and
Yes.
canned, canned grass. And then she put sugar in, I'm sure. I don't know, like anything that you could put in a can and preserve it, she did it. And I'm like, throw it out, Mom, out. No, this is not in the house. I don't care if it's from 1972 and that was a good year. Out, gone, not in the house. And my dad's cattle was what we grew up with, but there's about when I left for for college, they stopped doing hogs, so I know the hog history. So if I tell him he can have bacon, he can eat sardines, he can have brisket, he can have hamburger, where it's fat and
He's
very few
smiling.
carbohydrates. Yeah, like he's like,
Happy,
oh,
happy.
okay, that's great. And my mother's like, what? I'm like, just this is what you got to do, Mom. And you're going to pee on these things called ketone strips, and we're going to text, we didn't have FaceTime then. I'll do the major part of that story is I said, Mom, I know this is going to be really hard, so I'll do it with you. And I think that was the hero moment. That it wasn't that I knew about a ketone or was asking her to do something. I am a woman of faith, and I know that there's not an accident that I listened to that podcast. I don't usually listen to Tim Ferriss. That I was so captivated by why are they using this, that I really had studied. This is a big deal. Why don't I use this in my practice? And why am I alone? I can hardly whisper what I'm doing because I can't find anybody who's doing anything close to it. And now I'm gonna bet my mom's life on it. Yeah. So 6 weeks, we do the dirtiest version of a keto diet, meaning we peak ketones, but we did not lose weight. We did not, but I knew something was right because she'd been on antibiotics. I mean, she has a defect of her white blood cells, like 1 in 5,000 white blood cells work correctly in her. And now I send her home. We put her on a ketogenic diet. She's peeing ketones within 48 hours. And I know 2 weeks in that something's up because she's been on antibiotics for 50 out of the last 52 weeks. And now for 2 weeks, she hasn't asked me for a prescription refill. I'm like, okay. And I just think, oh, maybe she's got some in the drawer. I talked to her on the phone and she sounds good. She's calling me at 3:00 in the afternoon when she used to be sleeping. She was like sleeping all but like 6 hours a day when this story starts. And it probably takes us by the 4th week before I'm like, I just know in my heart when I hear her voice that something's up, that I haven't seen her. She lives 100 miles from me and I've got a practice and kids and husband, like I got the life going on. And here she comes back for the oncology visit. So I said, Mom, I'll meet you at the hospital where he practices. She walks into the lobby where we'd made this bet, this moment where one hallway or the other. And I see her walk through the door and I don't even recognize her. I mean, she glows compared to the woman I saw 6 weeks ago. And I don't care what those labs are about to tell me. She looked amazing. And she's got the skip in her step, the one that I remember as a kid. And I don't need a lab test, but we get the lab drawn and we go and we wait in the exam room. And then they come back and redraw it about an hour later. And they're like, must be behind. We're just waiting behind that room. And I can hear the oncologist say, where is it? Where are the reports? And he's looking for the outreach notes for the chemotherapy. And they just are absent. And at this point, I completely chicken out and I say, Mom, if he starts asking you about this, just shut up. Hold the silence. Hold the line. Just be quiet. Because I have no idea what I'm going to tell him.
Right.
And he comes in and he asks he's like, well, did you get the chemotherapy done? And she goes, no, I told you I'm not doing it. He's like, well, then what have you been doing? And she looks at me and we win. We hold the silence longer.
Yep,
Finally,
yep.
he speaks and says, well, our chemo, we were really hoping that we decrease the doubling rate so that it only increased by about 30% in those 6 weeks. That was what the expectations for chemotherapy was. No place in my whole mind did I have expectations that we would lower her numbers by 70% in 6 weeks of a rinky-dink ketogenic diet.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And we walk out of there, and that's like the first 4 chapters of my book.
But this
Wow.
begs so many questions, because the history, you came to the ketogenic diet the same way we got the ketogenic diet, which was back in around 1900, fasting people with seizures. They had less seizures. Well, they're like, you can't starve somebody to death to not have seizures. So then they're like, well, how do we mimic what happens in the starvation state? Well, what happens in the starvation state is you switch over to ketones, your brain burns ketones. For whatever reason, that seems to have this effect. Ergo, ketogenic diet is born. Okay. 125 years ago. So the
Right.
part that drives me absolutely crazy is, we did a hacking chemo episode with a dietitian who used chemo to hack, or used keto to hack her
Yeah,
chemo
she's from Canada too.
for ovarian cancer, and had a tremendous outcome. I mean, it's ovarian cancer, for heaven's sakes. And she's like, well, cancer cells don't live on ketones. They need a glucose environment. And I'm sitting there saying, okay, I practiced medicine for 32 years, and I need to start a dopey podcast
to learn this.
to learn all of this stuff.
Right.
When none of this is a mystery, none of it is hidden. It's just been suppressed. It's all 100 years ago. I mean, Dr. Salisbury of Salisbury steak fame was curing people with Crohn's disease by feeding them steak in a hospital. And
You know how many? Yes, exactly.
It's like, no, you need Embrel. We need to completely destroy your immune system to heal you. And I'm like, what?
Yeah. So I want to know what, I have so many questions about now, but what do you think? Because we have a friend that just went through horrific stage 4 colon cancer. That was a big surprise to the oncologist, and we and she has her theories what triggered that. That's all I'll say. But she silently, against her oncologist's will, did a keto diet, even though she asked them, do you believe in this? Shouldn't I be starving the cancer cells? And they're like, no, don't do that. It's bad for you. You won't have any. Like, they were so opposed to it. And so you're in internal medicine, you deal with oncologists for your patients a lot. Like, what is your thoughts on their thinking of why most of them, I think 95% probably or more, won't ascribe to this keto diet for cancer? Any thoughts?
Oh my gosh. I mean, there's a kink in the thinking at least 40 years ago where this was going to be some genetic thing.
Right.
What's your genetic code for breast cancer? What's your
Right,
genetic code for this? And it's like the layers of education, the mentor, the generation of mentors you'd have to go back to get out of that thinking.
Yeah.
They're dead. Okay. So it has to be the rogue approach, because you teach what you've been taught. And I mean, science is supposed to give us to abort that plan when it's not working. And for clearly, we are not working in the world of obesity and cancer. But there's a few of the folks like my friend Sean Baker. He had a very similar story where he was doing the right thing and then gets kicked out.
Right.
And I think it's the kicked out part. Like, I don't want to say it was a badge of honor to be kicked out, because it was a terrible setback for me emotionally.
Right.
Like, it was so much pain to not be in the place where you really could make a difference. And I think I could push replay on that season of my life and try to be as nice and kind and as driven, but my soul was not going to let me do some of the things they were going to let me do. And this is the best version of me. I got kicked out and I found a different way. And then you find the stray sheeps outside the flock, because you do need a tribe in medicine. I can remember in 2017, Dom D'Agostino had his first little conference for research that was being done on a ketogenic diet. It was at University of South Florida. here in Tampa. I'd never been to Tampa. And I said, Chad, we got to go. And we were one of 50 people there. And the other people are researchers, and they're all these really, I got a little flag, I got my little clinic. And I told my little husband, who has nothing to do with medicine, I said, you go down that hallway and you take notes for all the lectures, and I'm going to be in this hallway and I'll take notes for all these lectures because I need people around me. And I think when you are in that other realm where you're in the corporate world and you see what happens to people when they get kicked out, you don't want to be kicked out. You do not want to have happen what happened to Sean or happened to me. It's awful. But it also is awful to stay inside when you can see the pattern you're doing ain't working.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Mhm.
one of the first oncologists that says, can you send me 50 copies of your book? I want to give them to my cancer patients. And she runs a clinic in Boston, and she works for the VA. I thought, how the hell are you surviving inside the world and you're attracted to my book? And she's like, I read your book. It's the freedom my patients need to see we can do this. Because she's in a place where, the coverage is the veterans. She can get covered what she needs to get covered. A ketogenic diet is rogue. There's nobody helping her do it. She doesn't have the space and time to do it. But she's at every one of those conferences too, saying, we need this language in there. We need somebody in the lane who's going to teach this. And that's where I ended up in there. And I didn't mean to make it my whole career, but it's a huge part of everything I do now. Every patient, you can't get in my clinic if you're not keto. In fact, you don't need to see a doctor to be keto. But if you have a problem, I only take care of them when they're in a ketogenic state, because so much gets better, and you don't need me if you're keto. If you're
Interesting. So let's talk about that.
But yes,
can we?
but there you go. There is the disconnect, because we interviewed Sean. We actually met Sean at a conference in Ocala, which was amazing because he's about 2.5 of me. Like,
me too.
he's a month. And it was fascinating is he's excited because he's found this thing that helps patients lose weight, get rid of inflammation, and not need surgery.
Amen.
And he's like, I found the secret sauce. And as a physician who wants to help people, he's excited. He goes to the Blue Blazers that run the hospital. They lose their mind because they're losing money now.
Right.
And so the fact is, we were excommunicated just as you. That's a whole other story. That's for probably a bottle of whiskey or more and some time. But the fact is, the bottom line is the bottom line. Look big picture. I'm a big picture guy. I've got 600 skydives. I like looking out the open door of an airplane. And here's the thing. If what the medical system and the pharmaco-industrial complex, if what they're saying is true, then every one of us should be unbelievably happy, perfect weight, living to 105 with 6-pack abs and perfect sexual function. Instead, we are dumber, fatter, and way less happy than we've ever been, which tells you the system is not just broken. The system is killing you for profit. And I would have never been this outspoken before. I've just seen too much now. And I've seen too much on the other side where people get remarkably better and get rid of all of their pills.
Yeah, it is. I mean, that's my slogan for my clinic now is I want to stop as many prescriptions as I've started. And I'm an internist. That's all I did was match symptom to prescription and blood test to, this one doesn't work. Here's the next one in line, buddy. My life has been, a bot could do my life.
Well, so they will.
I know, actually. I think
that's why your private practice is going to be so much more valuable as time goes by, because people will actually be able to connect with the person. I've told tons of my PAs that I work with, because I work in urgent care, so it's largely, it's very fast paced. I'm like, if you are an algorithm, you will be replaced. Do not think like an algorithm.
Right.
People, they hunger sort of for the nitty gritty of like, people can look up how to do keto. I mean, we have a friend that's not even in healthcare that lost weight doing keto. She coaches people, charges a little money. I mean, there's keto books, there's keto everything out there. But what about, I guess, the things that people want to know about is like, can anybody do it? You always hear about the keto flu, and everyone sort of expects to feel like crap. And then people think of giving up the things forever that they cherish the most. I think of no more wine or no more, there goes chocolate forever. So what are there big stumbling blocks that are certainly harder for people, or
Well, I think that mentality deserves a little bit of that answer deserves a little bit of framework for my mentality. So when I leave corporate medicine and I decide I'm going to, specialize in broken brains, but I live in South Dakota, Sioux Falls, South Dakota. There's not a lot of population there with broken brains, but I do my thing. I'm bread and butter. But what I noticed was my EMR wasn't connected. It's private. It's my own server. Nobody's on my EMR. And the two big competitors in town, they come to mine. I was outside that. So the first place that I found attraction were people whose brains were broken from addiction. And when you've been, drugging and drinking, that brain needs repair. So 10 years into running my part as the physician, but also having this place where if you needed somebody to get out of habits of addiction, we did that. We did not put a neon sign on the outside. It just said internal medicine. But that was what, if you wanted your kid to not do sex, drugs, rock and roll, we used things like Vivitrol. We did really aggressive ways to keep them from getting euphoric. But then we also had, I studied myself, like, how do people get better? And if you look at the 5-year mark, who stayed sober? What do you think the most important predictor of somebody in sobriety at 5 years when they're trying to change a behavior that they've never done right, at least in recent years of their brain? What do you think the biggest predictor of? Like, could it be Vivitrol? Was it?
No, it's probably the people they're hanging around with.
I think it's well, and I've also heard religious conversion. Like, if people have a come to Jesus moment, they literally change their life.
It's truly the tribe. The support groups that were required by the judge. That's why we had them. But then we found, wow, this is actually where the real stuff is happening. And when you watch that behavior in a group of people, so it was their attendance to group is what the answer was there.
Right.
But when they would say, in their family of origin, they grew up in a way. And when, mom went out to the garage and smoked cigarettes every time she got stressed out, and dad went and slept with a neighbor, or whatever the behavior was that they saw or didn't see, they didn't see other behaviors like forgiveness for yourself. Like, what is it to have a purposeful approach to something in a way that's not just like self-motivating, like that it's richer. And I talk about these mirror neurons in their brain, that you and primates have these neurons that can learn behavior by watching, but you must see it in someone. You can't just tell somebody, I can say, here's what you should do. That's not going to activate a mirror neuron. And I tell this story to say the first time I learned something from my husband, we were in our first couple of years of marriage. He's a firstborn male. I'm the firstborn female. We're not supposed to get married. We're supposed to have a very contentious, intense relationship, for which we do. Our first, several interfaces, we're all arguing, and we're really good at arguing. We're really good at like fighting it out. And we're in the middle of a fight in the first couple of years of our marriage, and I'm right. I'm sure I'm right. He's sure he's right. And he did something I had never seen before. In the middle of the fight, he said, wait, you're right. I'm wrong. And I get goosebumps every time I think of the story, because I never saw that. Like, my parents did not do that. I learned that from him. And that behavior has to be seen to mimic it. And when I look at people who say, I can't do the ketogenic diet, it's terrible, it's terribly restrictive, I think you're using food for something you shouldn't. Food is supposed to be sustainable. The joy in life should come from other things besides what you're grabbing. And there's plenty of place to get joy on a ketogenic diet, especially if you already have obesity, high blood pressure, autoimmune disease, your hair's falling out, your ears don't work anymore, you've got chronic inflammation. It doesn't mean that, I'm on a ketogenic diet since 2015. I've had seasons where it's not perfect, and I check my numbers. In fact, on September 9th, I do what I think is the coolest thing in medicine I've ever done. And it was done kind of by accident, but I lead a live 3-week course We call it the 21-day metabolic kick, where I walk people through Zoom call. I only take 200 students. It's $2,000 a seat. And I walk them through what I would do if you were a cancer patient or a seizure patient. And we do this in a way where we hack your behavior, and we use positive peer pressure through your morning fasting ketones and your morning fasting glucose, all on a leadership board to say, are you changing behavior? And we I essentially put you in the protocol that I would do in my clinic. And then you have a built-in support group that you own. You guys have it. I don't want any liability, and I don't have any ownership of what happens next. But that transference, that this is now your journey, not your physician's, which I think if you've ever been in medicine long enough, you have people say, doc, it's not getting better. And they think it's that the responsibility is ours, when it needs to be shared and then returned back to the patient when they get to that place where they can handle it. But that process of how do you help somebody learn a behavior they've never seen? And you can't do it in isolation. You can't be the one flock, just like I couldn't be the doctor outside of medicine without somebody to collaborate with, to bounce ideas off, to know that I'm not alone in this approach. You can't do the ketogenic diet with no support. It's too isolating, and it's a rare person that can do that anyway. Let's put it that way.
Good. So what are we've done some shows on keto with the psychologist I'm thinking of, who treats mental health disorders, especially.
Oh man, she was something else.
Depression, bipolar disorder. And she really was great in getting into the nitty gritty of how biochemically it changes the brain neurotransmitters.
Georgia Eads, is that who it was? Was she a physician?
No, she's a psychologist
from the Seattle area. But I was wondering, and everyone knows, yes, it's going to help with obesity, reverse, diabetes, hyperlipidemia, hypertension. What chronic diseases are you surprised by that it reverses? Because I heard you say migraine, and I was like, oh
yeah. Okay, so there's 3 patient stories that make me think of what blew my mind.
Okay.
So in this story, in South Dakota, I would run a support group, a free support group. If you wanted to ask about the ketogenic diet, please don't call my office to try and become a patient. Just come to the damn support group, because I don't have any more space for you right now. That's in that season flex. And so I had these people coming to the support group, and they would, check in once a week, and we would do this little thing. And I don't know all of them, but you get used to the ones that are regularly coming. And this one woman had really slimmed down, and she speaks up after like a year of coming, and she says, do you think that this diet could reverse the ringing in my ears? And I'm like, I've never heard of that. I said, so before I, put my foot in my mouth, I say, why? And she goes, because mine left about a month ago, and I've had that in my ears for 20 years.
Wow.
And I'm like, huh. Now, who knows? But it's happened several times since then. So that story got my attention, because I'm like, okay, so let's go back and just unpack what is Meniere's disease. Why does it happen? Okay, that kidney cell's a lot like the cells in your, or that those otolith and inner ear cells are a lot like your kidney cells, and they get rid of salts and wastes, and they have goo a lot like that. And when there's chronic inflammation inside the cochlea, especially related in the joints of that, you can have a constant ringing. And I kind of thought, once it was there for 10 years, I don't care what meds I give you, it's not going to go away. I've never told a patient that it would go away. And then I had this woman say, I would have given anything for someone to take this away like 20 years ago, because it really can drive you nuts, right? And so you think about it, I'm like, okay, so I had this thing in my mind where, by this point, I've been doing keto for probably 6 years, and you really do get an understanding that you're not on the ketogenic diet unless you're pricking your finger and proving that you're in ketosis. Like the words keto on a wrapper don't necessarily translate to ketosis. It has everything to do with where you're at in insulin resistance and blah, 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 all the stuff. So the mentality of explaining to patients, hey, this isn't not just a cellular, like the fluid around the cell, but it's an intracellular, like the microvacuoles within those cells run more efficiently. There are several steps in the process that when ketones are being used as the fuel, people take antioxidants, but I'm here to tell you, most of those antioxidants never get to your mitochondria because you would need to bathe yourself and you would need to like put a truckload in to get them in your mitochondria. This molecule is a free radical absorbent, a sponge for free radicals that not only does a ketone do that, but it also burns more ATP, burns more. You get more energy out of that fuel with less waste and less protons bouncing all around things. And so you start to think about that every time somebody's asking you to think about, say, could this be? So the first story that blew my mind was that there was this, tinnitus in your ears. And so I put that in aside, but over the years, at least a dozen patients that have written in these elaborate stories about how their ringing in their ears went away. The second thing that I was, I was really, it makes me emotional. I can remember as a medical student, I was assigned to follow an internist for 3 years for my second year of medical school. So I knew all of his patients. He was an internist, but his specialty was GI. So he was a gastroenterologist, and I was in a program where you followed his patients when they went to the hospital. He went to the hospital. There was this young man, and he was 20 years old when I met him, and he had ulcerative colitis. The ulcerative colitis was awful. He was super skinny. He was just a riddled mess. And everybody kept trying to talk him into cutting out his colon. Cut it out. It'll be better if you cut it out. Cut it out. And he was adamant. He was like, no, I do not want to be that kid with a bag. He just wouldn't do it. And then one day something happens and his colon swells shut, and he's toxic. He's going to die if you don't cut the colon out. So the medical decision was made to cut his colon out, and he wakes up from the surgery and he's just pissed at the world that this happened. A month later, he commits suicide. And I remember the patient because nobody even tried a ketogenic. I don't even know the word, right? That if he would have been on a diet of high fat, suppressing that rev to his immune system that was doing the wrong thing, this thing all these other, fancy medications are supposed to do to shut down immune systems while making you more at risk for immune problems. Yeah. I'm like, does anybody get that's stupid?
Yeah.
And the number of cases that I've had, Nick Norowitz is a great, he's a colleague of mine, but is a great example that he's a PhD, Harvard medical student who trained at Oxford for his PhD. And he's got like parents as physician PhDs, and he ends up with Crohn's disease to the point where he was dying, like heart rate going into the 30s because he was a mess. And he was a chronic runner. So he was lean. He eventually goes on a ketogenic diet and now has biopsy reversed, no Crohn's disease. And that's not the first one. That's just a famous one. There's plenty of them out there that I have eaten my words saying, you have an autoimmune problem, your immune system destroyed, whatever, you're never going to get off your thyroid medicine. And I was wrong. You were right. I was wrong. You can reverse that. The stories about cancer, I'm careful to talk about. Like my mother's story is an incredible story. But a more relatable one are migraines. I have a lecture that I gave to the Department of Defense on what chronic migraines do to brains and how that is it is a predictor of Alzheimer's, a predictor of dementia. You are actually destroying brain cells every time you have one of those migraines. Quit doing that every month, ladies. Figure out how to not do that. And when you look at the way the brain is bathed in a glucose-fed state versus a ketone-fed state, I can give you the best of anti-migraine medications. I can put you on anti-seizure drugs. I can do that. But what a better gift that you reverse the pathology inside the brain and stop hurting your brain. You aren't going to like what that scan shows you when you're 53. And that's the reality of my clinics where you see this over and over and over again. Like, no, do not be a woman who just says, oh, it's just my monthly migraine. Don't do that. So those are my 3 stories. tinnitus, Crohn's and ulcerative colitis, and then migraines.
Interesting.
So do you have to be in ketosis all of the time?
So when we do that class, I work to get morning fasting glucose, morning fasting ketones at a level that I can predict autophagy. Like I can predict the reversal of, that eat the trash in your body. So that is pretty easy if you've not been making ketones. Where if you're just coming to it, you drop your carbs, you're going to be in ketosis, most of you. And then there's the gal who's morbidly obese, been insulin resistant for years. And if you go back to the starvation study that they did in Minnesota, like in 1970 something, like 60s or 70s, they locked them in the hospital for like 45 days and they kept track of things. And in the patients who were severely BMIs of 35 or greater, they're at the 12th day before the ketones are high.
Wow.
That's terrible.
Wow.
They are using muscle mass before that. That high, chronically high ketogenic or insulin state, otherwise known as insulin resistance, it locks that fat cell to not let go of its fuel. And even in that, like by the time you get to the 12th day for that person, the body says, okay, for real, we're starving. Okay, we need to open up the fat cells. But for 12 days, to ask a patient to do that for 12 days, no way, nobody's going to do that. So getting somebody to a place, if they're insulin resistant, to say, I need you to rev up the fat. That's where the fat from your mouth to wherever it's going to park in your body, at least I can access it. And when the carbs are low, the insulin's less, that fat getting turned into ketones, God, it feels good. That's how you can help somebody with insulin resistance get to that phase of a ketogenic. What happens next is the insulin settles down to a new layer, and then you have to teach them how to crack the code, the next step down and the next step down. So
you're saying that actually putting them on a ketogenic diet, so like ultra high fat diet, ultra low carbohydrate, actually kicks a morbidly obese person in insulin resistance into ketosis faster than if they were actually eating zero.
They will use protein. The insulin isn't as protective as the protein. That the insulin, you're insulin resistant, so that fat cell is locked.
Wow.
So this is where you get the stuff that I've seen you post on, like eat butter for a day, eat sardines for 3 days. Like you're literally pushing them into ketosis,
right?
By having them consume so much fat that their body is like, okay,
right.
I get it. This is what I'm doing now.
And that's that freedom. Once they feel that, like you'll have people who've been saying they're keto for a while and they've never, they don't feel good. Their hair's still falling out. Their skin still looks like they're 90 and they don't have the energy that you should have if your body's actually burning and making ketones. So once you get them into that state, they're human. They're going to reset. They're going to go back into the locked phase of fat cells because insulin will settle down. Your body will get used to this new insulin level. And now I need to rev your metabolite. I need to help you crack the code for the next layer. That's really, so when people say, do you have to be in a ketogenic state the whole time? I'm like, well, what are you trying to fix? What do you want out of this? And we're going to keep pushing you into the ketogenic state until you're at the healthy level. And then I hope you'll join us every week. And my personal life, I'm still keto. I eat a high fat, low carb diet. But I also fast for about 60 hours a week, not because this is my favorite thing to do, but because I moved to Florida when my teenage son, who was a senior, sophomore, junior, senior, we lived like an hour away. So we spent like an hour and a half on the road to there. So I didn't have time for working out. And so I got in this habit for the last 3 years that I don't have the space enough for the workouts as well as I'd like them, but I can fast. And for my crack the code, I've been insulin resistant. I've had 3 babies. I've been 45 pounds more than I should be. And I'm not perfect, but I'm not there. And I don't want to go any closer to that. But my beta cells inside my pancreas remember. They remember how to make excess insulin. It's not hard for me to slip back into that other space. And this is the rhythm that I can do that doesn't send me slipping backwards until I can, rein back in the exercise schedule that I'd love to brag about, but can't.
So is there a general carbohydrate number that people need to be below?
Yeah.
I know there's a range for some people can push the limit a little higher to be in ketosis.
Yeah, I tell folks 20 total carbs per day or less is where you begin and where you stay until you prove to me that you can make ketones at a higher level. And I'll tell you, if they've been around the sun, 50 times, if they've had a weight problem where it's more than 10 pounds for 6 months, by definition, they've got some insulin resistance, and they'll slip right back into putting on weight instead of taking it off without having a pretty persistent fluctuation of ketones. Like, are my ketones perfect every hour, every day? No. That when I sleep, I like to wake up when my ketones would be like 0.7, 0.8. Sometimes they're only 0.4. And so I do it wrong too. But in a week, I know that I hit at least a 2 somewhere when I'm fasting. At the end of a fast, it's usually somewhere 2.2. I've really pushed my metabolism. It's not easy. I get hungry. I get crabby. I want to have food too. But to know that I'm doing this so that at least once a week I rev my metabolism so I don't slide back to what I used to be. And then I have a husband and we eat together after I get off work, so eating in the afternoon isn't as easy for me. That it used to be kids that I use that excuse for. So I'm finding my way to a new season. Ask me in a year.
Is there anybody that should be cautious with keto? And on the second part of that would be, is someone who's low body weight, do they need to be careful or not? Does it not matter?
Yeah. So let's do the low body weight first. So I have a few patients, brains are my thing, right? So I have Parkinson patients that are low body mass index. They have a high metabolic rate from their disease state. And so they've whittled down to a lower body mass. Their brains do much better in a ketogenic state. Their mass, they don't need any littler mass, right? Mm-hmm. That's dangerous. I don't want them losing muscle. I don't want them losing bone, but if they've got some fat on them, I'm okay with that. So I can give them the peace of mind of knowing in an advanced ketogenic state, so where the ketones are high and the glucose is low, you have a signaling agent that protects against muscle breakdown. There's several studies on that. If you want me to explain, I can go into, but the punchline is when ketones are circulating, your body protects against the breakdown of protein and it preferentially uses fat. Okay, good for my Parkinson's patients. Right. So now if she's losing weight, she has, we can do body scans and we can prove this, but she's preferentially losing fat. But we want her to not lose weight. I mean, she's already a lower mass the way it is. So in those patients, we really do have, it's a high fat eating. As soon as we put in carbs, the ketones go away. Mm-hmm. So, and that ketogenic state is needed for that Parkinson brain to be as reparative and as quiet and sleep as deep as possible. All the parts of the highest quality of life for Parkinson's patient. So the weight loss, where I tell patients is, remember that the biggest measurement of your life isn't the scale. I don't want you losing muscle mass. I want you in the gym working out. I want you doing some of those things, but not in trade for brain cells. So I try to keep that as perspective for my low weight patients. There's several cancer stories that are like that too. Like, I want you using fat. How do I get you to do that? I make sure those ketones in circulation are high enough to prefer the fat cell. The other one is there anybody that shouldn't be on this? And I would never, I think I haven't found anybody that couldn't benefit from cleaning up the chronic inflammation in their life. I do know that when patients come to me and they are the type 2 diabetic on 4 blood pressure medicines, and they have a CPAP machine, and they're the traditional internal medicine with 15 pills, and then they want to slam dunk into a ketogenic state. And although I think that's the right direction, the rate at which you go, you can land on the floor. You look at what is keto flu, and it is particularly heavy, meaning a lot of symptoms in somebody who's insulin resistant. And that patient with a whole bunch of meds and all, type 2 diabetes, that's insulin resistance, period. When you try to put them in a ketogenic state and, you watch, I have this worksheets I have my patients do. It's in a workbook. I'm like, okay, follow the workbook. And if you are in one of these categories, you're going to end up with such a dramatic drop in that that circulating fluid that your blood pressure is going to go low. You are going to have a feeling of low fuel to your brain, because as the glucose drops, especially the insulin resistant patient, it's a delay before they make that ketone. And so they feel terrible for about 2 days, and some of them longer. So it's in those patients where I say, you might want to sip on ketones that we make, or you might want to have MCT before you start. Put ketones in circulation so they're available for you when you start to stop making so much sugar. And I've just found that there are a lot of people who literally crash and burn, meaning they don't die. Their blood pressure drops. They feel terrible. The amount of salt it would take to raise their blood pressure is going to cause us other problems. And you need to go a little slower. You should also percolate ketones. I tell them, sip on ketones for the next week while you read the book, while you read these little lessons.
Right.
And then you're going to see where we're going. And then we'll teach you how to open up your fat cells.
So you obviously believe that there is a place for exogenous ketones.
Yeah, I think that's really the research that's done here at USF. Dom D'Agostino and his band of researchers that are working on like anti-seizure, anti-cancer modalities. And I think I think it's like anything. Do I want you on a blood pressure medicine? No, I want you healthy. Okay. We are several steps away from that right now. We'll get you there, but time matters. I mean, especially when somebody is coming in saying, I'm on chemotherapy. I really want to use the ketogenic diet as a way to augment what's happening. I'm like, I can't slam you into a ketogenic state. We'll put you in the hospital. So start with getting ketones in circulation, and then, read the book, get the workbook. We're going to start you in a framework of how to set your mind into this. So exogenous ketones aren't forever. I mean, I like them way better than coffee in the afternoon, and circulating ketones beget ketones. I know if I have a few ketones in the afternoon, my morning ketones tomorrow, ketones only last a couple hours, so they're not like still in me tomorrow morning, but my liver will make more throughout the night, and tomorrow I can hold my weight steady if I sip on ketones in the afternoon. So it's better than coffee for me.
Can you add vodka to those?
Yes, you can. I have several testimonies of people saying it's the best martini ever.
Just keep it under 20 grams of carbs. There you go.
Yeah, there's the challenge.
Well, count your macros, and you too can be keto.
No, this is great, because I mean, we could talk to you for hours, but it's just.
I'm your neighbor, so I'm kind of hard to get rid of.
Yeah, exactly. But it really is just this divorce from common sense is what drives me absolutely crazy. I mean, there's ways to treat patients that are literally ancient, but they're not anti-scientific. I mean, this was studied scientifically 100 years ago plus. Mm-hmm. And we have lots of data. We have actually lots more data on this than other things that we do to children at day one. That's a different story that we won't talk about because YouTube doesn't like it. But it's fascinating how, it's eat real food, move, get sunshine, have good relationships. If you do those things, and sleep, of course. Right. But then look at what the ketogenic diet does to all of those other things, what it does to sleep, what it does to mood, what it does to all of the other downstream effects. It's just amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. When people say, why are you on a ketogenic diet? I have one answer. I'm like, my brain.
Yes.
Like, that's like, you can hurt my legs, and my heart can do it is one of the best parts of the book in my book, I talk about the place that gives me confidence that, am I hurting patients? Am I hurting patients? And that is, they're called the ketogenic seizure kids. And they failed Depakote. They failed lithium to control their seizures. They're in their teens, like 8 to 12, I think the age of the kids were, and they failed, so that they ended up on the ketogenic diet. And this is in the 1950s and 60s, 50s or 60s. Anyway, when I wrote my book, there had been several of these, seizure kids that were on the ketogenic diet who signed a lifetime of being able to follow, and autopsies that they could look at the end of their life. And they had 2 or 3 autopsies at the time I wrote the book, where their brains were beautiful. Like you look at a chronic seizure patient and there's holes in it, even 100, even many decades later, their brains aren't built right. These brains were beautiful. They did not have the neurofibrotangles. They didn't have tau proteins. I had brain envy of seizure patients. And these people they were compliant because if they didn't stay in ketosis, they peed their pants and fell on the floor.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. So they spent 70 years in an advanced ketogenic diet. And not only that, you know how they can do the blood samples where they look for cancer? And you have cancer cells in circulation. Okay, we all have cancer cells in circulation. They couldn't find the cancer cells in these. Now, there was only two autopsies done at that time. And I mean, that's remarkable. Like their bodies aged in a way that I want. I don't like fasting every week. I love food, but I do have a desire to have the best version of my life, the highest quality of a lifespan. And I'm going to use a ketogenic diet because of my brain to do that.
Well, we were just asked the question last night by a friend after, all the interviews we've done over the past years, from vegan to carnivore and in between, what the best diet was. And, I kind of came to the conclusion that it was really whatever was working best for you, because, everybody's tolerance is different. But I'm starting to think probably the keto diet might be the, pinnacle for everybody.
Well, it's definitely low carbs. I mean, the
Yes.
stuff that makes absolutely zero sense to me is vegan. That makes no sense.
It's awful.
Like absolutely no. And those people like what Sean talks about, like the vegan neck. And I'm like, yes, that's a thing.
Yes. And their brains are terrible. They're so hard to repair. Like,
Right.
I don't think I'm your girl. You need to find somebody else to help you, because we're gonna butt heads here on how to fix this.
Well, I know you have to run, but let's, why don't you tell everybody where they can find more about you and your work online? I know you're on YouTube and Instagram and your website. So why don't you share those?
Sure. Yes. So if you go to YouTube and type in Dr. Boz, Boz MD is our website, and you can find all the links to the stuff we do there. But I will say a special shout out to anybody who lives in the Tampa area. I truly believe in having a community where you have support. And I look across my parking lot here, and there is a bowling alley in Tampa called the Pin Chasers. And my little postage stamp of an office doesn't have a boardroom where I could have a meeting, but they have a birthday room, and nobody else wanted the birthday room at 8:00 on Tuesdays. So if you're in the Tampa area and you're looking for a support group, it's free. I answer questions to people who come, and we help people stay in the lane of a ketogenic diet by offering a free support group in our community. And I would invite people to come meet me.
Wonderful. I love that. That's really cool.
You do a little bowling at the same time.
Good.
There's no food allowed. It's like,
I was going to say no snacks for you. No snacks for you. All right. Thank you so much again, Dr. Boz, for sharing, your journey on how you got to the keto diet, the story about your mom. Everybody wants to know the ending, so you got to buy her book to read about that. It's been a pleasure having you. And then don't forget, everyone, to get a copy of your book any way you can, and Keto Continuum.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And everyone else, if you like this episode, please share it with your friends, subscribe, leave us a rating, and until next time, stay curious and keep questioning.
Thanks, May. Thanks, Tim. It was really nice to meet you.
Thanks. You as well.
It's no secret that medicine is a bit uptight. That's why Tim and I created BS Free MD, to mix things up a little and have fun in the process. Besides, we are having these exact same discussions all the time, so we thought we might as well invite everyone to the party. If you really like us, you can get plenty more, and maybe see one of Tim's cool tattoos on our Instagram or Facebook pages at BS Free MD. See you next time.
While we try to keep BS Free MD as raw and real as possible, we can't be held responsible for any medical decisions or discussions had as a result of what you've heard on the show. We know, bummer. But the truth is, we really do care about your questions. So feel free to reach out to us by email at doc@bsfreemd.com.